to call to order the regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. May I have the roll call, please?
Chair McGill,
Here.
Vice Chair Lesnar-Buxton,
Hugh.
Commissioner Aldana,
Present.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Nielsen,
Here.
Commissioner Price, Commissioner Ramsey.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda.
All right, thank you very much. I did not see any written comments done. I assume there weren't any. All right. That takes us to public comment. I will read it. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comment will be 15 minutes. Clearly, I have no speaker slips. Do we have anybody online?
There's no one online.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to Commissioner Committee assignment reports. I'll start on my right this month, Commissioner Ramsey.
Nothing to report.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Clark.
I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting, and we'll discuss all the items on that agenda later today.
Thank you. Commissioner Aldana.
Nothing to report today.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Nielsen.
During the council interviews yesterday, there was a couple applicants that were applying for the youth council, so they're still trying to fill those remaining 9 spots that we had talked about earlier in the summer, and it was great to see a couple applicants out there from various schools. So hopefully that will round out the youth council headed into the rest of the year.
Great, thank you. Yeah, hopefully. Vice Chair Lesnar-Buxton.
Yes, to report.
And ditto for me, I was out of town last week, so I missed my subcommittee meeting, so nothing to report. All right, that takes us to commission and staff communications. Anything?
No additional communications.
Okay, thank you. Ceremonial items. Do we have any ceremonial items?
We do. We have one recognition of staff. Araceli Ibarra, who is a administrative specialist with the Recreation Division, was honored for 10 years of service. So those of you may never have met Araceli, but she is integral to the operations of our youth and sports programs, particularly during summer camp. So she's a key conduit for many of those programs, and she works at the Korea Recreation.
All right, well, Araceli, congratulations on 10 years, and really pleased to have somebody working with those all-important youth programs. Okay, so that then takes us to the summary of council actions, which everybody should have in their packets. And anybody have any comments or questions? Otherwise, we will going once, all right? And then that takes us to the minutes with the recommendation that the commission waive the reading and approve the minutes of the regular meeting of September 24th, 2025. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, motion Aldana, second Nielsen. Assuming no discussion, we'll go ahead and go to a vote. All righty, and the motion passes, and that takes us to, at 4:05, the trees. Welcome, Mr. Slack.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. The first Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove an American sweet gum located within the front setback of the property at 114 Coronado Circle. The applicant was requesting removal of the tree primarily just due to the hardscape damage in the driveway that's immediately adjacent to the tree. The committee reviewed the application. We looked at the tree on site. They commented it was in fair shape, but due to previous pruning, had some decay in the upper canopy. Some larger cuts were made. So it was, kind of just an average health overall. The driveway damage was pretty extensive. We've seen a lot of American sweet gum applications, both street trees and private trees. They do have, kind of a more shallow, pretty aggressive root system. They're pretty high on the sort you probably top 3, top 5 in terms of like hardscape disruption when they're close to roads or driveways, sidewalks, that sort of thing. In looking at the extensive damage and the proximity of the driveway in relation to the tree, it was the committee's opinion that the amount of root pruning that would be required when the driveway was repaired would be detrimental to the tree and its existing location and condition, and ultimately decided to support the removal of the setback tree. I think it's important here to draw a distinction between the street trees that we look at, where street trees are public infrastructure and they've caused damage to the sidewalk and, in limited instances, sometimes private hardscapes as well, but we're able a lot of times to fix those, whereas this is a private driveway and a private tree situation. And I think the committee did view that differently than how we would typically see a street tree and management of hardscape-related issues. There is a large sweet gum already on the property, but the committee did feel pretty strongly about mitigating the loss of the tree and recommended to the commission to approve the removal on the condition that a new tree is planted that can achieve a minimum height of 30 feet at maturity. And I think it was the good forest management was actually the finding that they used for that one.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Nielsen.
It was the finding of principles of good forest management that was a little surprising to me about that one. Does that just speak to if they replace the driveway, they'll further damage the tree, and it's better principle of forest management to replace it with a healthy tree appropriate than it is to try to save the existing tree in that circumstance? Is that the connection that we drew?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, essentially that's correct, yeah. I think that, I said the tree was in fair shape. If you were able to see it, the arborist on the committee, there was, pretty extensive decay in the upper portion of the canopy of the tree. And a lot of the growth is adventitious as a result of pruning that probably took place a couple decades ago. So yeah, they were of the opinion that the root pruning and the general health of the tree, it would just be a loss anyway. So it made practical sense to allow the removal and replacement.
Thank you, Mr. Slack.
I have 2 questions. My first question is just the writing of the recommendation. It's conditioned on a new tree that can achieve 30 feet in height. Were they thinking a canopy tree or any tree? Because the language does not specify canopy.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, I think the replacement trees are always viewed as canopy trees, but if the commission concurs with the recommendation, they could certainly add that to make sure that it is a shade tree.
Okay, and which then brings me to my second question. Does the condition be that it needs to be a setback tree? And the reason I'm asking the question is when I had a look at theirs, it seemed like the large canopy trees on that lot and on the adjacent lots were just kind of really nicely spaced. And I wasn't quite sure if it was me where I would put a 30-foot potential canopy tree given the really kind of nice density that's there already.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, I think that was the intent. It wasn't specified. I think usually it's like setback tree for setback tree. So I believe that the committee was thinking that it would go back in a very similar location.
Okay.
An appropriately chosen species, I think, can function, kind of in that general zone without being a threat to the driveway if they do make the repairs and elect to remove the tree.
So what they're thinking is that a different root structure, it could go in the same space and then it would just kind of fit the slot nicely as opposed to trying to cram in next to another large tree.
Chair McGill,
Which was my
Commissioners.
concern.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and you could move it up and over, sort of closer to that, shrub, and 30 feet is pretty small in the tree world, and so there's a lot of trees that would be pretty well behaved in that location, I think.
Okay, thanks. With that, my board is not lighting up, and I We certainly do not have any speaker slips. Is there anybody online?
We do have someone online. Eric S., if you're wishing to comment on this item, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature, and I will call on you, and you can speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. His hand is not raised.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I am opening it up for discussion and/or a motion as appropriate. Commissioner Aldana?
I'll move forward with the motion.
All right,
And the motion to agree with the street tree committee to approve the removal on the condition the applicant plant a new tree that can achieve 30 feet in height at maturity. And then as far as a canopy tree though,
okay, and then good forest management?
correct, good forest management.
Okay, and thank you. Commissioner Clark?
I was just going to second.
Okie dokie, we have a motion and a second. If we do not have any further discussion, I will go ahead and take it to a vote. All right, motion passes. On to Sycamore Canyon Road.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove 2 blue gum eucalyptus located at 1761 Sycamore Canyon Road. The applicant's requesting the removal of the trees primarily due to safety-related issues. They stated that the tree further down on the bank was undermined just as a result of water flow, and then the tree further upslope that's kind of on the flat portion of the ground there, quite a bit taller, leans towards the home, and their daughter sleeps in a room that's kind of close to the trees, and they were just generally concerned about them. The committee looked at the trees, reviewed the application. They were kind of in fair to poor health, I would say, in terms of the committee's review. There was pretty quick consensus that they did support the removal. We've seen increasingly that the committee does support the removal of the blue gum eucalyptus. I think that when looking at this whole site, these trees did pose a little bit more challenge, I think, in the committee's eyes, and there were still a lot of other eucalyptus trees, on that property and adjacent. So it wasn't like they were proposing to remove every large tree on the site. It was really just these 2 eucalyptus trees. In relation to mitigation, the applicant did not provide they didn't show a willingness to replace the trees on the application, and rather pointed out that there were 5 relatively young but healthy coast redwoods in the immediate vicinity. And that was true, and the committee did recognize that. In addition to those trees, they weren't highlighted on the application, but there were quite a few native willows and sycamores too that were growing amongst the 2 blue gums. And in a sort of a different approach than what we've seen with the committee, they were actually pretty supportive of allowing the existing vegetation to remain and not condition any trees for mitigation. And the reason why is because the amount of native willows and the sycamores that surround those immediate stems, as well as the coast redwoods that were sort of adjacent to these trees, would grow in significantly over time and fill in the space. And so after review, they made a recommendation to approve the removals with the condition that the applicant, take as many measures as possible to preserve all of the understory canopy, and also made mention that the commission could use the finding for good forest management to support the removals.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Commissioner Aldana.
Okay, because this is a setback tree, where is the property line? Because you got the road right there, and just curious to know on.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, I don't know exactly how wide the right-of-way there is. Kind of generically speaking, it can be 8 feet in areas that are undeveloped. I don't have the exact distance. There could be an off chance that the property line is straddled with the right-of-way line somewhere where that one blue gum is, that's on the upper portion of the slope closer to the road, but
Okay. So who made the decision that it was a setback?
it's just staff put it on there, it's easier. It really doesn't change the review of the committee's recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, I had a question. I guess I was curious as to what take all appropriate measures means, because when I read it, my immediate reaction, what I wrote in my notes is like, whoosh, this is awfully woolly. How do you ascertain that all appropriate measures have been taken or not? And then particularly with respect to the coast redwoods, and I may be wrong, I may be understanding these trees not correctly, but aren't the redwoods more of a, they like fog and moisture type of tree? Or is that a different redwood? My concern is that the trees would not be given what they need. Anyways, go ahead.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, I think for the most part, what you're saying is correct about the species. If you look at its like native range, there's a lot of just moisture in the air. I don't think that the committee thought that there would be any like long-term struggles with the trees in that general area. It is an part of town that does get like kind of socked in with marine layer quite a bit. So I'd say it's probably of the parts of town that might be conducive to the species performing, this probably is actually a pretty good location. And then I think in terms of, the applicant did express a desire to retain these trees. So I think the committee wanted to go with sort of a good faith gesture in their recommendation to support the removals and support their desire to retain these trees. In terms of control measures to make sure that they're protected, it's difficult to really pencil it out to like a level of detail. I've talked to the applicant, I told him what the recommendation was. It's their desire to not, that it's advantageous for them to retain all of that vegetation. Otherwise, you just have a stark view of their home. So I do believe that that's their intent as well, but it's difficult. They just felt really strongly about making mention of that and making sure that it was in the report and conveyed to the commission as to why they didn't recommend mitigation trees.
Okay, thank you. So it's kind of like a trust, basically. Yeah, guts and trust, yeah. Okay. Okay, I am not seeing anything else, and we do not have any speaker slips. Do we have anybody online?
Anyone who would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand in the Zoom control panel. No hands raised.
Okay. Commissioner Nielsen?
Mr. Slack, can we elaborate a little bit more on the poor health of these? I get that the hillside and the root ball is undercut, but is that actually impacting the health of these trees in a significant fashion?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, I think that would be more of what we would call a structural issue. So I think when we say health, it's just like how full is the canopy, is there a lot of decline in the canopy? So in this case, there's, I would say subtle decline exhibited throughout the canopies. But we've seen, I would say over the last several years, that the Street Tree Advisory Committee doesn't really hold the blue gum as a very valuable tree species. And oftentimes, whether the commission concurs with it or not, the Street Tree Advisory Committee gives recommendations to support the removal of this specific species. It's very rare in terms of like tree preservation citywide, but of the species that we see a lot of applications for, it's the opinion of the committee that it's an undesirable species, and that's really, I think, what's driving the recommendation more than even the health and safety issue.
And can you speak to why the blue gums fall in that category? Is it, fire risk or the root ball structure and just the perceived hazard, or is there something that this specific tree exemplifies that makes it in the blue gum category ripe for removal itself?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, I used to be a staunch defender of the blue gum, and that's waned in my urban forestry career as well. They're a tricky tree. They grow to really large heights, and in terms of a species profile, they fail more frequently than other species do, and that tends to be at the soil line. So you'll see like a root plate failure. So I think when you look at the challenges of assessment, they're a pretty tricky species to manage from that perspective. The Sycamore Canyon area, despite having the sprinkling of blue gums throughout, is a pretty native, it's a fairly native area with a lot of sycamores and oaks, and I think that it's, the blue gum is seen as an undesirable species in these, quasi-native areas as well. And then in terms of fire risk, I think, you can manage all trees to really reduce fire risk, but of species of trees that are a little bit higher in terms of the challenges, the blue gum generates a lot of debris, and if that debris is not managed, it can be a fire-related issue due to like fire ladder, where you've got a lot of sloughed off bark and things like that accumulated at the base of the tree, and then you can get embers that move up through the canopy. But I think it's seen as an undesirable, non-native species of tree because it does have a tendency to spread through these areas. And you can go to we were just at Honda Valley today walking around, and you can kind of see it. It does migrate through more natural parts of the community, and I think that is also a consideration of the committee.
Mr. Slack.
All right. And I see that you had, your name was up, Commissioner Ramsey, and it is no longer. All right. With that, is somebody prepared to make a motion? All right, then I will, which is that I will move that the commission concurs with the Street Tree Committee with the recommendation for the removal of the 2 blue gums at 1761 Sycamore Canyon Road on the condition that the applicants take all appropriate measures to maintain and sustain the underbrush native trees and coast redwoods. Commissioner Clark. And the principles of good forest management. All right, we have a motion and we have a second. With no further discussion, I will go to a vote. Okay, and the motion passes, and we're on Castillo.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove 14 Italian cypress located, this is also within the setback at 2126 Castillo Street. So this is a relatively unique application because it is essentially just a full landscape refresh that's desired from the property owner. So they engaged a local landscape architect to come up with a plan to sort of open things up, kind of with the stated issues of the plant material being dated, it's growing up against the building, shading issues, a lot of, really were no structural issues. It really, at its core, the catalyst for the application was a desire to really kind of update the landscape around the property. The committee looked at the trees. There was general consensus that it wasn't that critical of a loss, I think, despite the large number of trees. I think the committee commented that they really appreciated the thoughtfulness of the proposed landscape design. It did have some replacement trees. There were 4 bay laurels proposed, which can actually grow into like a small, nice canopy tree, and then 5 silver sheen pittosporums, which probably fall more in the woody shrub category, but function similarly to the Italian cypress, but are a lot less dense and allow more light penetration, and then the rest of it was just landscape plants. There was quite a bit of on-site discussion. One committee member felt really strongly about retaining the Italian cypress and saw a lot of value in them, whereas the other 4 committee members, really liked the proposed landscape plan and did support what was proposed. And in looking at the site in full context, they also commented that there were a couple new camphor trees planted on the side street there in a large parkway, which eventually would fill in and create that, that streetscape and that shading effect that we desire, all throughout the community. And after review, made a recommendation to approve the removals on the condition that the 4 bay laurel and the 5 silver sheen pittosporums are planted as proposed on the landscape plan, and recommended that the commission could use the finding that the character of the immediate neighborhood would not be impacted by the removals.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? I have no questions. Oh, okay. Commissioner Clark, you didn't come up.
My only question was, and I don't know if we talked about it, in order to allow more light to filter into the balconies, because they're pretty socked in, what would the cypresses look like if they were pruned enough that light could get into those apartments?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Clark, probably pretty terrible. So don't say that jokingly, but they would look pretty bad. So cypress in general, they don't generate a lot of new growth. So we talk about like growth response a lot when we look at trees, and some trees will push a lot of new growth and they'll get like nice and fresh, whereas the cypress really don't produce a lot of new growth. So if you were to like thin them out, they would be very twiggy and dead looking, and then they would never fill back in. So it's if you've ever pruned a juniper or a cypress or anything like that, you don't get this new growth except for out at the very tips. And so they would probably look really funky, and I don't think that it would really help what they're trying to accomplish with the landscape refresh.
All right, I am not seeing any additional questions. I obviously have no speaker slips. Do we have anybody online?
Anyone who would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand in the Zoom control panel. No hands raised.
All right. Given we have no further questions and no discussion, I am willing to entertain a motion if somebody would like to make one.
Make the motion to agree with the street tree committee to approve the removals on the condition the applicant plant the 4 Saratoga Bay laurel and 5 silver sheen pittosporum as proposed on the landscape plan.
With the finding.
And the finding that the character of the neighborhood would not be impacted.
All right, we have a motion. Commissioner Ramsey?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Assuming no further discussion, we can go ahead and go to a vote. All right, the motion passes. And Seacliff, and you were right about not being able to see over the fence on Seacliff.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation is a request to remove 3 evergreen pears and 6 queen palms. These are located within the front setback of the property at 3102 Seacliff. The applicant was requesting removal of these trees due to planned improvements of the property, and they hope to put an ADU essentially right in the middle of that open space within the property, and all of the existing trees are in conflict with that. And they also stated a desire to put the ADU in and then refresh the landscape and match what they've done with the rest of the property, which is native plants and some olive trees. The committee reviewed the application, some of us were able to see over the fence and talk about the trees. The general consensus was that it was a reasonable and practical development of the property with the proposal to put an ADU there. There were discussions about the number of trees removed versus the number of trees replaced. The applicant did propose planting 4 36-inch box olive trees to match what they've done throughout the rest of the property. It was the opinion of the committee that the 4 shade trees did satisfy mitigation requirements and from their perspective. And a lot of that had to do with the queen palms being proposed for removal, and we've long talked about the sort of lack of shade and environmental benefits associated with palms, despite them having, their place in the urban forest. And then additionally, just the spatial considerations. When they looked at, putting a ADU structure there, you really are limited on space, and putting 4 trees in seemed like a pretty generous amount of trees for the area with the new structure being put there. So after review, the committee made a recommendation to approve the removals on the condition that 4 36-inch box olives are planted as proposed on the application, and recommended that the commission could use the finding of a reasonable and practical development of the property.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Nielsen.
Can you remind me, Mr. Slack, that if this is approved conditionally based off of 4 box olives, do they have the ability to change their mind and say, oh, actually, I want to change that to magnolias or something else down the road before they go to plant the trees?
Chairman Gill, Commissioner Nielsen, I think the technical answer would probably be no, because it's part of public record. So I think what, the applicant proposed that, so sort of like what we talked about with we're trying to be sensitive about the surrounding plant material. We're kind of going in good faith. And then I think in addition to that, we've been trying to shore up the motion so there's more specificity to satisfy some of the commission's comments about, making sure that we're being a little bit more detailed about what's being recommended to the commission. So that's why it was called out specifically.
Thanks for clarifying.
All right. Any additional questions? I have no speaker slips. Do we have anybody online?
There is no one online.
All right. With that, and unless there's any further discussion, I am prepared to accept a motion. Commissioner Ramsey?
I'll make a motion to conditionally approve the commission's recommendation to, sorry, I got jumbled up.
For the removal of,
For the removal of, sorry, the 6,
you can just read it off the orange sheet.
yeah, okay. Oh, failing in front of this big crowd. Removal of the 3 Prius, the evergreen pear, and the 6 Sargus queen palms, under the findings of it's a reasonable and practical development, on the condition that they plant 4 36-inch box olives proposed in the landscape plan.
Great, thank you.
I'll second.
Okay. Good going. All right. We have a motion and we have a second, and we'll go to a vote. The Latin names always trip you up. All right, and the motion passes, and we're off to Foothill Road.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove an Italian stone pine. This is located within the setback of the property at 4151 Foothill Road. So the applicant was requesting removal of this tree due to essentially just safety concerns, safety/maintenance concerns. So several months back, there was a really large limb that failed that was attached basically at the base where all of the other branches originate. And it was the applicant's opinion in consultation with a private arborist that it made practical sense to remove the tree. We reviewed the tree on site from a health perspective, pretty green, pretty healthy. The arborist on the committee had pretty significant concerns about the structural side of the tree. So if you're able to make a site visit and really look at where the limb failed, you can see a lot of competing stems. We would call that like codominant stems, and those all had relatively weak points of attachment, and from a risk perspective and a structural perspective, it seemed as though it did have like long-term potential to lose additional limbs. There was conversation on site while they were inspecting the tree if it could be mitigated through pruning, and it was the committee's opinion that really it was too difficult to prune the tree and manage it in such a way that you could really reduce the risk factor enough to where you could say this tree's probably going to be fine and stay together and not have another relatively large or potentially, catastrophic limb failure compromising the rest of the tree. So after review of the tree and the noted structural issues, they were in support of the removal. During discussion about mitigation, looking around, there's really not a lot of canopy. There's no really street trees to speak of on that section of Foothill, which is really more of a highway. It's not really so much our jurisdiction, but the setback regulations apply to this property. And just the starkness of the loss of the stone pine really was a sticking point with the committee. And in a sort of a change than what we're used to, they really felt strongly about the need to condition more than one replacement tree to offset the loss of this tree. And they actually ended up settling on wanting to recommend 3 trees. Essentially, if you were able to be there, there's a really long linear stretch that would lend itself to several replacement trees. And it was their opinion that it was necessary to kind of offset the loss of this really significant tree on the property. And so after review, they made a recommendation to approve the removal on the condition that 3 new trees were planted that could achieve 30 feet in height at maturity. With the recommendation, the commission could use the finding of good forest management.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Slack. Any questions? So I have one, and it's maybe more general education than this tree. This codominant limb failure, is that something that's common to stone pines? Stems, thank you.
Chair McGill, commissioners, some species do have, they don't have like great natural branch architecture, and you could say that about the stone pine. I think that's where like pruning becomes really important when a tree's young, because we can kind of manage the situation so these things don't happen. But certainly I think of the conifers, this one probably is a bit trickier when you look at codominant stems.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking is they're so spectacular that, it just sort of hurts my heart to lose any of them. But it has to be balanced with the structural concerns. Commissioner Nielsen, and then Commissioner Ramsey.
Mr. Slack, I think I might recall from when we were talking about Italian stone pines on Anapamu that these don't necessarily fare well in our climate, that maybe they're not as drought tolerant do I have that right? Is that the species just struggle in our town?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Nielsen, I think you can broadly say that we're seeing conifers not perform as well, and a lot of that's due to climate change and 20 years of drought and then 2 years of heavily saturated soils, which can actually make things worse, but that's a really complicated conversation. So I think it's questionable, but with the right sort of care, a conifer can still be successful. When we talk about Anapamu, the real challenge there is that we've shoehorned a giant tree in a small space, and that's led to a lot of challenges, for the tree, and a lot of that's related specifically to like hardscape management. So a stone pine in a relatively, this is a much wider open space, and it's clearly been successful here, even with probably very minimal irrigation. So I think it's a testament to the species can do fairly well if given the right location. But if you put it in the wrong location, it's very problematic and, you know, just can be a very challenging situation to manage.
Thank you, Mr. Slack. I think I'd like to ask, follow up, this, do we have an approximate height on this? It looks well over 30 feet, and so I'm wondering if the committee discussed how they arrived at the recommendation for 3 replacement trees of at least 30 feet as opposed to a taller number.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, I think that when the committee, they often tend to, it's like minimum height at maturity at 30 feet, you know. I think when they were looking at this, that this tree surely is taller than 30 feet from my recollection on site, but when you're, the condition to plant more than one tree, it was their opinion that, you know, a 30-foot minimum height at maturity, that's a, you know, small, medium-sized tree, and if you're planting 3 trees there, it's really going to fill in the area. We don't see a lot of conditions that exceed 30 feet typically in terms of like height requirements. I think that, you know, there's a lot of value in, you know, planting a more appropriately, you know, small to medium-sized shade tree just from a long-term management perspective. And I'd say consistently the committee rarely ever recommends like a mature height much more than 30 feet.
I, in my almost 8 years, can't recall a single instance where there's been a recommendation over 30 feet. Commissioner Ramsey.
Yeah, so to harp more on that 30 feet, you mentioned another commission was saying we need to be a little bit more specific. And when I look at the 30 feet, you know, maybe I would say, oh, blue gums, those get huge. That will qualify, but then the street tree committee is going to be annoyed because there are more of those blue gum trees. Are we able to give a little bit more definitive path to these people to say, hey, these are what the street tree master plan says, these would be ideal for this location, or are we all just kind of setting the bar at whatever tree gets over 30 feet?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Ramsey, what we try to do is just on the back end, if like the commission recommends, say a tree of, you know, 20, 30 feet, whatever the number ends up being, we just try to work with them to see what they're going to plant, to see if it satisfies the requirement. And we're certainly happy to like engage and talk about what species of tree may be good for the site or what may not be. But I think that it's typically always just done in this manner to give a lot of latitude, just because you can plant such a diverse array of, you know, tree species in the community that leaving it open-ended and just making sure that whatever tree they choose satisfies the condition is good enough from the committee's perspective.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No speaker slips. Do we have anybody online?
There's no one online.
Okay, thank you. So I will open it up for any further discussion or a motion. Going once, Commissioner Nielsen.
I guess I'll just share kind of where my head's at. I'm not excited about this one potentially coming out. I think I'm somewhere between fall back on that it should hopefully get 3 good long-term replacements, and that's a good long-term vision. And if it seems like a healthy specimen, to deny without prejudice and see if it gets worse and let them come back down the road if it does get worse. I'm very much on the fence on this one.
Okay, so there's a discussion in terms of a deny without prejudice. Is that a motion? Sure. It's a, yeah, which, and I guess where I'm coming from on it, and just without motion at this point, is, like I said, it hurts my heart whenever it's a spectacular specimen like this, but I cannot imagine that the committee took this recommendation lightly, because it is actually in a fairly open area. It's not like Anapamu. And so the structural concerns in a populated area, you know, like near a car park and in a medical facility, concern me enough, and then the mitigation is a pretty strong mitigation. So that's where I came from with it. Commissioner Clark.
That's, since we're talking about where we're at, that's also where I'm at. If we wait to see if it gets worse and something happens to a person, I'd be concerned. The structural failure part and the arborist looking at it and thinking that it's not specifically sound is what concerns me. Although I don't want to lose a tree either,
Yeah.
for sure.
And obviously, the arborists on the stack concurred. Yeah, that's correct. Is that a correct statement?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, that's correct. And just to do like a deeper dive on the structural issues, you would have to do like massive amounts of pruning of the remaining canopy to try to reorient weight back towards the vertical stems, and the tree would look really strange for a really long period of time. And then without very extensive, very frequent maintenance, you're risking the tree essentially just falling apart. And so I think the committee and the arborist, and we have some really knowledgeable, very seasoned arborists on the committee, despite the size of the tree and its health from a distance, the structural concerns and the amount of maintenance and even just one delayed interval of very, very frequent maintenance could lead to the tree, kind of almost blowing up, given how poor the structure is, where all the limbs attach. That was really what pushed them over in terms of recommending its removal.
Commissioner Nielsen.
I think that convinced me, and I'd be happy to make a motion if no one has additional discussion.
Yep. Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
I will move that we accept the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation to allow the stone pine at 4151 Foothill Road to come out on the condition that it can be replaced with 3 new trees that achieve 30 feet in mature height, under the finding that, I think it was good forest management, is what they said. Maybe not, someone can help.
Correct.
And would you like to also condition that they be canopy trees?
Yes.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. We'll go ahead and vote. And we have, the motion passes. And that takes us to San Roque. I was having a brain
Chair
fog in
McGill
there.
and Commissioners, the next item for review is a request to remove 2 tipu trees. These are located at 629 Calle Palo, Colorado. The applicant requested the removal of the trees for 3 primary reasons. One was hardscape disruption, debris, and then essentially like safety concerns with limbs failing during high winds and weather events. The committee reviewed the application. We looked at the trees on site. They commented the trees were in really great health, pretty spectacular specimens for tipu tree, and really, despite how dense vegetation is in San Roque, these trees were like really significant fixtures on this specific street. In addition to that, the driveway, which was damaged, and the nearby curb and gutter as well, was recently replaced by the city as part of like comprehensive hardscape repairs throughout the neighborhood. Debris, as we've talked about a lot, really isn't a consideration. Even though tipu can be challenging, they get a psyllid that drops like a waxy little ball, which can be quite annoying, as well as leaf and limb drop potentially. It was the opinion of the majority of the committee that they were pretty spectacular trees, important to the property and the neighborhood as a whole, and they recommended denial of the request to remove the 2 tipus at 629 Calle Palo, Colorado.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Mr. Slack? Do you want to comment further on the one dissenting member who thought that the northernmost tree could be removed to allow the southern one to flourish more?
Yeah, Chair McGill and Commissioners, that was essentially their perspective. It was an interesting discussion amongst the members, but one of the committee members, one of the arborists, in their view, the tree to the right, further upslope, was kind of suppressing the development of the tree, downslope on the opposite side of the driveway. And certainly they're commingling, but the majority of the committee, kind of countered their opinion with the fact that the trees have developed essentially together this whole time, and despite the closeness and the intermingling of the canopies, have functioning well, and didn't see their perspective, didn't agree with the perspective of that one committee member.
It would certainly impact the aesthetics. All right, any questions? Nope, all righty. No speaker slips, obviously. Anybody online?
There's no one online?
Okay. With that, if there is no discussion, I will take a motion from somebody, or I'll do it myself. Commissioner Clark, you're just, you're hitting the wrong button.
Yeah, I was just had a little hand seizure. I would concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation to deny the removal of the 2 tipu trees at 629 Kai Palo, Colorado.
Why is that one hard?
That's hard.
All right, I'll second.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. And we will go ahead and vote. All right, and that takes us to Plaza Del Monte and Belmonte, my walking route.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next 2 items I'll talk about together, but we'll review them as separate motions. These are street tree designation changes. So the primary catalyst for the review of both of these streets was actually a residential inquiry and request, and we've been patiently waiting for a long time to review this for them. Their request was a desire to have more native street tree species in the neighborhood, and so we put it in our queue, and eventually we got around to reviewing it, and it was for all of Plaza Del Monte and all of Belmonte. And if you saw on the map or you were able to cruise by there, it's a very isolated little neighborhood, and so for the purposes of review, we looked at it kind of in full context. And the existing designation for both of the streets was just jacaranda, which is one of the official city trees, but is also prolifically planted. And our desire to move towards more diversity, it actually did make a lot of sense to take a look at these 2 streets and see if there was a need for additional street tree species as part of the designation. So Plaza Del Monte is a little longer. The Belmonte street section's quite small, really. It's just sort of the entrance to the Plaza Del Monte street segment. The committee was sensitive to, the desire to plant native trees, and I think in the interest of increasing biodiversity in the neighborhood, where we essentially have, for the most part, a monoculture of just jacarandas, they did see value in adding additional species. So for Plaza Del Monte, they recommended retaining the jacaranda because it is prolific through the neighborhood, and some of the residents do feel really fond about the jacaranda, but also recommended the inclusion of the desert willow and the coast live oak, both of which are native tree species. And then I'll just go ahead and snap forward since we're in the discussion phase. For Belmonte, also retaining the jacaranda and then adding in the desert willow, which is a native, much smaller tree. And the rationale for not including the coast live oak really had to do with just how small of a length of street that was. The committee didn't see a need for 3 species when both of these species do really well in that part of town. So for the purposes of the recommendation, the committee recommended that the commission approve the inclusion of jacaranda, desert willow, and coast live oak for the street tree designation for all of Plaza Del Monte.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Slack? How was a decision made as to which gets planted when the time comes?
Chair McGill, Commissioners, that's a great question. I think for the most part, we've been trying to focus our planting efforts on, we dial in an area and then we go in and replant that area. To a much lesser extent, we have residential requests where somebody will contact us, and in that instance, I think, there's always spatial constraints, but we would try to probably allow some flexibility in relation to what species that individual wanted. But if we were to go in there and do a survey of both of the streets, I think we're looking at, probably trying to plant the coast live oak where it makes sense because it's a larger shade tree, so we're maximizing canopy cover. And then, in terms of just on street tree count, utilizing the desert willow in some of the smaller spaces. And then, where appropriate, still, kind of using the jacarandas. There's actually a lot of street trees in that neighborhood, so I don't think it would be something that would queue up in our efforts in the near future for like a replanting effort. But that's kind of our general approach always, and that's why you always see like usually a small tree included in the designation. So where we can, we try to plant the largest, most functional tree possible, but then there's a lot of other spaces that we can, use a much smaller tree, and that's where we would utilize like the desert willow in a neighborhood like this.
Okay, great, thanks very much. Commissioner Clark, you had,
Oh, I was interrupting you before you finished, and I thought you were asking how the Street Tree Advisory Committee comes to decisions on what trees to name. And I was just going to mention, like, every time I listen to one of these really extensive, very extensive conversations about species, I am impressed with their knowledge and their tenacity and their passion. Like, it's just, they take like lifetimes worth of knowledge and duke it out. It's amazing.
thank you.
It's just amazing.
Thanks. All right. No speaker slips. Anybody online?
There's no one online.
Okay. And so I assume with no additional questions here, so we need to take these separately, right? So I'll go ahead and do Plaza Del Monte. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve the changes to the master plan to retain jacaranda but add desert willow and coast live oak on Plaza Del Monte.
I'll second.
Okay. And so we have motion second. We'll vote. Okay, and that takes us to Belmonte. And unless somebody is just, okay,
Oh,
go for it, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to make a motion to agree with Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation to change the street tree master plan for all of Belmonte Drive to consist of the jacaranda and desert willow.
Now second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll go ahead and vote. And the motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Slack. See you next month. Actually, see you next week. And that takes us to administrative and staff reports, which is the director's report.
Chair McGill, members of the commission, I'm going to look back to last month a little bit because we talked about the trunk or treat event that's hosted at Spencer Adams. That is next Thursday, and it starts at 5 and goes to 7:30. If you run out of things to do and want to wander through there, it's actually really fun. For anyone that has children, it's probably most fun for them, but actually there's lots of opportunity for adults to hang out and chat with each other as well. There's usually a great representation from various cities' departments, and we do it in conjunction with the Police Activities League. Also, right after that, the next day on Halloween is our adapted recreation Halloween dance, which will be held at the Carrillo Ballroom. So that's always a really fun event. And we also have World Dance for Humanity, who, as usual, perform their Thriller Flash Mob, which always gets high marks from attendees. So just as a reminder, Halloween is around the corner. I think we all know that. There's a lot of candy corn showing up in the supermarkets. I thought we weren't allowed to make that stuff anymore, but I guess not. More to what's in your report today. Casa Las Palmas, which is the small building on the north side of Chase Palm Park, we call it the expansion. It was actually open in 1998. And as part of that, we have a few facilities. One is called Casa Las Palmas. We have had it closed for longer than I care to admit, but the purpose of that closure was to revamp the exterior patio, which sort of faces the Great Meadow, and install an arbor. With the original design of the project, there was supposed to be an arbor in the park when the park was constructed. That was not included due to cost, and ultimately, it's fortunate that it wasn't included because the location wouldn't have worked for how we use the park today. All that being said, we came up with an alternative location as a way to enhance that facility for use by the public, for special events, and so we've now enclosed that patio and provided accessible entrance from the sidewalk in front of the Great Meadow. We also used the opportunity to do a refresh on the interior, so similar to what we've done at Palm Park Beach House, and then put new partitions. Doesn't sound very exciting, I realize it, but the restroom that's adjacent to the playground, as you can imagine, gets a lot of use. It's tidied up and looks quite a bit better. So we have an open house scheduled for November 5th. Just forwarded a follow-up invitation. The ribbon cutting's at 1:15. If you have a moment to stop by any time in that time would be great. We will find an opportunity for the commission to see the facility separately. The project was funded in part by the last remaining redevelopment agency funds. So it was a redevelopment agency project long, long, long ago. And for those of us that remember what happened when they eliminated them statewide back in 2011, some of those funds were reinstated, and this is the last project to complete with those funds. Matched with Measure C because, as you can imagine, costs have increased in the last 30 plus years. And then Mission Rose Garden, so that's the AC Postel Rose Garden in Mission Historical Park. We have a solid crew of volunteers, and we have a volunteer appreciation event every year. We have one coming up next week from 4 to 5 p.m. again. If you'd like to stroll through the park, have a few snacks, meet some of our volunteers, if you have the time to do that, please join us for that as well. And that's all I have to report, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Director Zachary? All right, with that, thank you. We have no old business, we have no new business, so that brings me to adjournment. So we are adjourned. And see you all next month.